Arizona Territory. 1878. The desert sun was already burning high when Clara Sutton buried the sheriff. She stood alone behind the rise north of Dry Creek, her black dress clinging in the wind, a shovel in her hand and two frightened children clinging to her skirts. The grave was shallow, the ground too dry, the man not worth more. Sheriff Dugan had died the same way he lived, cruel, drunk, and holding a rifle. Clara had not cried for him. Neither had the children. "Is he really gone?" little Ruthie whispered, her wide eyes searching the ridgeline like she expected the dead man to rise again. "He will not hurt you any more," Clara said. Her voice was steady. She knelt beside the girl and brushed her sandy hair back. "I promise." Beside her, 6-year-old Robbie clutched a wooden horse in his fist, silent as always. They had run. She had left behind everything in Prescott, the boarding house, the judgmental stares, the broken promises, and fled into the dry country with the children. Dugan had followed, trying to drag them back. He had not expected Clara to lift her father's revolver and use it. Now he was in the ground, and Clara was a woman alone with 2 children and no money, no horse, and no place to go. The wind kicked dust across her boots. She did not flinch. A distant whinny cracked across the canyon. She turned fast, pulling the revolver from her waistband, holding it steady with both hands as the rider crested the hill. He was tall in the saddle, his hat low over his brow, his shirt dusty from the trail. The horse was a deep bay, strong and calm beneath him. He slowed as he saw her, but he did not reach for a weapon. Clara kept the gun raised. The cowboy dismounted with easy patience, hands raised. "I do not mean trouble, ma'am." "You brought it anyway," she said flatly. "Turn around." He looked at the grave, then at the children, then at the revolver shaking slightly in her hands. "I reckon you had no choice," he said gently. "You look like someone who did what needed doing." Clara said nothing. "My name is Boone Merrick," he said. "I have a ranch south of here. I was trailing a stray calf when I saw the tracks. Figured something was wrong." She did not lower the gun. "You got a name?" "Clara Sutton." He nodded once like that settled something. "And the little ones?" "Ruthie, Robbie. They are not mine," she added quickly. "Their mama died 2 winters ago. Sheriff took them in." "The man in the grave?" "Yes." Boone looked at the children, then back at Clara. He did not ask questions she did not want to answer. "You are bleeding," he said instead. She glanced down. Her left arm was wrapped in a torn sleeve, blood soaking through the cloth. She had not even noticed the graze from Dugan's rifle. "Let me help," he said. "No. I have clean water and bandages in my saddlebag." "Let me help you, Miss Sutton." Clara hesitated. Ruthie tugged her skirt. "Please," the girl said softly. "He has a kind face." Clara lowered the revolver. Boone moved slow, careful not to startle her. He crouched beside her on the ground, pulling out a canteen and a strip of linen. He worked in silence, cleaning the wound, wrapping it tight and neat. "You are good at this," she said, surprised. "Had a sister. Took care of her when she busted her ankle back in '73. Learned fast. Where is she now?" He tied the wrap gently, then leaned back. "Gone." The word was heavy. Clara did not ask more. Boone stood and looked toward the horizon. "You cannot stay out here. I do not have a choice. We will find our way. You will not last 2 nights without supplies or shelter. I have survived worse." Boone looked at her then, really looked at her, like he could see the fire under her fear. Then he looked down at the children again, Ruthie's thin arms, Robbie's quiet eyes. "I would not feel right leaving you out here." He paused. "You can come to my ranch. I have room. The children can rest. You can figure out your next step." Clara's jaw tightened. "You do not know us." "I do not need to. I know what it is to be chased through the dark and have nowhere to go. You need safety. I can offer that. She studied him, the set of his shoulders, the steadiness in his voice. You will regret this, she warned. Boone held her gaze. I would only regret leaving you. Something broke open in her chest. He did not look away, and somehow Clara found herself nodding. They rode slow, Ruthie in front of Boone, Robbie clinging to Clara's waist as they rode double on Dugan's old horse. The sun dropped low as they crossed the arid plain, the shadows long and gold. Boone's ranch sat in a valley rimmed with cottonwoods, the barn solid and the house small but clean. A black and white dog barked once, then came wagging. Boone dismounted and helped Clara down, his hands warm at her waist. He opened the door to the house. You all can sleep inside. I will take the barn. You do not have to. I want to. Clara nodded. That night, she lay on a cot beside the hearth. Robbie curled beside her. Ruthie slept with her thumb in her mouth. The fire cracked softly, and outside, the wind stirred the trees. She stared at the ceiling, listening to the sounds of peace she had not known in years. And in the barn, Boone sat sharpening his knife by lamplight, thinking about the woman with blood on her sleeve and steel in her voice and how something in his chest had started to ache the moment he saw her. He did not know what tomorrow would bring, but he had meant what he said. He would only regret leaving her. Clara woke to the smell of coffee and the creak of floorboards outside the door. The morning light slanted through the gaps in the shutters, dust motes dancing in its path. Robbie lay curled beside her, his small chest rising and falling in a rhythm that steadied her. Ruthie was gone from the cot, but soft laughter filtered in from the porch. She rose slowly, her bandaged arm stiff but no longer throbbing. Her dress, creased from sleep, still held the scent of dry wind and pine smoke. She stepped quietly out into the morning. Ruthie sat on the porch steps, a tin cup in her hands. Boone crouched beside her, showing her how to feed a biscuit to the dog without losing her fingers. He likes the soft middle best, Boone said. You give him crust, he'll just look offended. Ruthie giggled. He's polite about it, though. Clara stepped outside, the brightness making her squint. Boone stood, brushing his hands on his trousers. Coffee's hot if you want some. She nodded once. Thank you. He passed her a battered tin cup without touching her hand. Robbie still asleep? He is. Boone leaned against the porch rail, his gaze fixed on the distant ridgeline. I'll need to ride out to the north pasture once the sun's a bit higher. Got wire down from the last storm. Cattle'll find it if I don't get there first. Clara sipped the coffee. It was strong, bitter, and welcome. You want us gone before you get back? He turned toward her. I want you to be safe while I'm gone. She studied him. You expect me to stay here? I do. Alone in a man's house, out in the open with no neighbors for miles. She measured the risk. You trust me that much? I trust you to protect those children. That's enough for me. Ruthie leaned into the dog's side, her small fingers tugging gently at its ear. The dog only thumped its tail. What if someone comes asking after us? Clara asked. Boone shook his head. Nobody rides this way unless they mean to, and I don't take kindly to uninvited guests. She nodded slowly. I'll keep the door barred. He looked at her for a long moment. I believe you would. She didn't deny it. By mid-morning, Boone had saddled his horse and ridden out. Clara stood at the edge of the porch, watching the dust trail fade behind him until it disappeared into the folds of the earth. The stillness that followed wasn't empty, it was thick with the sound of insects, the rustle of cottonwood leaves, and the creak of the barn roof in the warming sun. While Ruthie played with the dog and Robbie set up his wooden horse by the well, Clara began to tidy. The man's house was simple but kept with care. She found flour in a tin near the hearth and biscuits wrapped in cloth beside the stove. A few books sat on a shelf near the window, mostly ledgers, but one was a worn copy of Homer's Odyssey with the spine half gone. She turned a page, then closed it. The house smelled faintly of soap and cedar. It was the first place in years that didn't carry the scent of fear. That afternoon, she hauled water from the well and rinsed the children's clothes, hanging them along the fence to dry. Robbie helped without being asked, handing her clothespins with solemn focus. He hadn't spoken a word since they'd arrived, but his eyes followed everything. As the sun dipped westward, Clara spotted a figure near the tree line. She stiffened, but it was Boone, leading his horse with a coil of wire slung over one shoulder. His shirt clung to his back, dust streaked across his jaw and forearms. She met him halfway to the barn. "Fence hold. Enough for now. I'll need to dig some new posts next week." He didn't ask what she'd done all day. He didn't need to. The shirts drying on the line and the swept porch spoke for her. "You're welcome to stay as long as you need," he said. Clara crossed her arms. "You offering charity?" "No, ma'am. I'm offering quiet." She studied his face. "Why?" Boone rested a hand on the saddle horn. "Because I've known what it is to carry too much alone. It wears a person down." She didn't speak. He added, "You don't owe me anything. I just figure you've had enough taken." Clara looked past him, toward the hills turning amber in the twilight. "I'll cook supper." He gave a small nod. "I'll feed the stock." That night they ate stew thick with beans and salt pork. Ruthie told Boone about a bird's nest she'd spotted near the well. Robbie stayed quiet but leaned against Boone's arm when they sat by the fire. After the children were asleep, Clara stepped onto the porch. Boone followed, lighting his pipe with a match struck against the post. "How long since you've had peace?" he asked, his voice low. "I don't remember." He took a drag, exhaled into the dark. "It's not much, this place, but it's steady." She looked at the sky. "Steady sounds like a promise." "It can be." She turned to him then. "I told you you'd regret this." Boone's eyes didn't leave hers. "I would only regret leaving you." Neither of them looked away, and under the weight of his words, Clara felt something crack open in her chest, not fear this time, but the start of something warmer. She didn't answer. Not yet, but she stayed on that porch beside him, watching the stars climb over the cottonwoods, and she didn't think of running. The days settled into rhythm, quiet and useful. Clara pulled her weight, though Boone never asked her to. She churned butter from the cream he brought in from the heifer, patched a split seam in one of his shirts without fanfare, and swept dust from corners no hand had reached in months. Ruthie helped with the chickens, naming each one with grave importance, while Robbie took to following Boone on his morning rounds, wordless but attentive. By the 5th day, Boone started leaving a second tin cup on the porch rail without comment. Clara would find it waiting, filled before sunrise and never cold. She never said thank you. He never asked her to. One evening, a low roll of thunder crept over the hills as Boone hammered a new latch onto the corral gate. Clara stood nearby, holding the lantern steady. Her shawl tugged in the breeze, hair loosened from its pin. "You always work this late?" she asked. "I work when there's work," Boone said, adjusting the hinge. "Son doesn't much care if I've eaten yet. What if it never stops needing fixing?" Boone straightened, wiping his hands on his trousers. "Then I keep fixing. What else is there?" She looked out at the darkening sky. "I used to think there had to be more. There is. But most of it comes slow." She glanced over. "And the rest?" Boone gave a shrug. "Gets taken before you know it's yours." The wind picked up, carrying the scent of rain and mesquite. Boone stepped toward the barn, then paused. "Storm's coming." You and the children should sleep in the house tonight. We have been. I know. Just keep the window shutters fastened. Lightning likes to test wood. Clara nodded once, and they didn't speak again until the rain came. That night, as wind rattled the eaves and Ruthie burrowed beneath the quilt, Clara sat beside the hearth watching the flames shift and stretch. Boone entered without knocking, shaking water from his coat. You dry enough? She asked. He hung the coat by the door. Close enough. She stood, moving toward the stove. There's stew left. It's warm. Boone didn't sit. Can I ask you something? She turned, ladle in hand. You can ask. When you ran, did you plan where to land? Clara hesitated. Not exactly. You just came into the desert with 2 children and a revolver? It was better than staying. Boone didn't press. You're not like most. Clara watched him. You say that like it's a good thing. It is. She handed him the bowl, and for a moment their fingers touched. His hands were rougher than hers, but warm. He sat at the table, the flicker of firelight making long shadows on the floor. You ever think about leaving this place? She asked after a while. Sometimes, but then I look at the hills. They remind me I'm still here. She stepped closer. You live like the world owes you nothing. Boone met her eyes. It doesn't. Clara folded her arms, voice low. You don't ask for much. I know what doesn't last. I don't chase it. She didn't move. I was married once, Boone said quietly. Before the war. Clara's breath caught, but she didn't interrupt. Her name was Joanna. She died of fever before I could get back. Clara sat down across from him. You don't speak her name like it hurts. It used to. Now I speak it so I don't forget. Clara didn't look away. I used to be a teacher. Before everything changed. Boone's voice softened. You miss it. Some days, children still learn. Even in silence. The wind outside settled to a low hush, the storm retreating beyond the hills. Boone touched the rim of his bowl, then looked up. You said I'd regret letting you stay. I haven't. Clara's voice was quiet. You still might. He leaned forward, elbows on the table. I would only regret leaving you. She didn't answer right away. Her throat tightened, but she didn't look away. You don't even know what that means yet, she whispered. I reckon I do. They sat that way for a long time, the room warm with fire and something unspoken. Behind them, the children stirred in sleep, safe for once. Clara rose at last, setting his empty bowl in the basin. Boone stood as well, stepping back toward the door. She turned before he reached it. We'll stay, if that's still your offer. His hand paused on the latch. It is. Her voice was steady now. Then we'll stay. Boone gave a single nod. Then he stepped out into the dark, rain-washed night. Clara watched the door close behind him, her heart quiet for the first time in years. By the second week, Clara no longer slept with her boots beside the bed. The knife still stayed tucked under the mattress, but the readiness in her limbs had begun to ease, replaced by the quiet exhaustion of honest work. Boone never asked for more than she offered, and maybe that was why she began offering more. She found a broken treadle tucked behind a stack of crates in the barn one morning, buried under a tarp and stiff with dust. The frame was sound. The belt was split. She wiped it clean on instinct, fingers tracing the iron curve of the pedal. That evening, she set it outside in the yard while Boone watered the horses. You planning to fix that? He asked, nodding toward it. I was thinking about it. There's a spare belt in the shed, far wall under a coil of harness. Clara looked up. Why do you have a sewing machine if you don't sew? Boone adjusted the bridle in his hand. It was my mother's. Came west with her in a freight wagon. She used to make shirts for the neighbors. Clara brushed the grit from the footplate. You keep a lot of things you don't use. Boone leaned on the fence rail. Just because something's quiet doesn't mean it's useless. Clara didn't speak, but her hands resumed cleaning. By the time Ruthie brought out a rag and began polishing the base, the machine shone in the dusk like something half-remembered from a different life. That night, Boone brought in a bundle of worn shirts and set them on the table without comment. Clara glanced at the pile, then at him. "I suppose I'll see what I can do," she said. "You don't have to. I know." He nodded once, then turned back to the door. Before he could step out, she said, "You didn't ask where I learned to shoot." Boone paused, then leaned a shoulder to the frame. "You'd tell me if you wanted to. I was 16. My father said if I was going to ride behind him on the trail, I'd better know which way the barrel pointed. First time I hit a bottle at 20 paces, he near dropped his pipe." Boone's mouth twitched. "What happened to him?" She folded a sleeve. "Railroad accident in Kansas. Steel came down on him hard. They said it was quick." He didn't try to console her. Just said, "Sounds like he taught you well." Clara looked down at the shirts. He did. The days stretched longer with summer setting in. Boone's cattle grazed higher up the ridge now, and he rode out before dawn most mornings. Clara mended during the quiet hours, the steady rhythm of the treadle a low hum beneath Ruthie's murmurings and Robbie's silent stacking of wooden blocks near the hearth. One afternoon, Boone returned with a split lip and a torn sleeve. Clara met him at the gate, her jaw tight. "What was it?" Boone swung down, wincing. "Barbed wire caught my arm." The lips from the steer who didn't want to move. She helped him tie off the reins. "You should have come back sooner. I'm not used to being missed." Clara stepped closer. "You are now." Boone looked at her like he meant to speak, but the words didn't come. Instead, he followed her to the porch where she cleaned the cut and dabbed whiskey along the gash. Robbie watched from the doorway, arms crossed, his eyes never leaving Boone's face. Clara didn't glance up. "He's waiting for you to flinch." Boone let out a breath. "I won't." "Good," she said. "He needs to see a man take pain without returning it." Boone didn't move while she stitched the tear in his arm. When she finished, he reached out not for her hand, but for the scrap of thread she'd clipped, twisting it once around his finger before letting it fall. That night, Clara sat on the porch steps long after the fire burned low, the air thick with crickets and the scent of sage. Boone stepped out quietly, settling beside her without a word. She spoke first. "I used to think if I kept ahead of everything, it wouldn't touch me. That if I could just run fast enough, long enough, I'd outrun the worst of it. You didn't." "No." Boone leaned forward, resting his arms on his knees. "But you stopped." Clara turned her face toward him. "I don't know if I stopped, or if I just finally found a place I wanted to stay." He looked at her hands resting in her lap, then back at her eyes. "What would it take to make you sure?" Clara didn't answer for a long time. Then, quietly, "A man who stays." Boone reached over and took her hand, not sudden, not bold, just sure. "I said I would only regret leaving you," he said. Clara's fingers curled around his. "I remember," she said, "and I believe you now." They sat in the hush of the night, the hills holding the last of the warmth, the porch beneath them steady as earth. Boone didn't let go, and for the first time in years, Clara didn't feel the need to run. A week passed, then two. July heat rose off the land in waves, rippling through the cottonwoods and drying the creek to a cracked ribbon of stone. Boone had taken to splitting fence posts before dawn and resting during the hottest hours, the children helping Clara shell beans in the shade of the porch. Summer had settled thick, but it did not press heavy, only full, slow, and certain. One morning, Clara found him at the edge of the field with a spade and a wheelbarrow of seed potatoes. He didn't look up when she approached, but his voice carried. These ought to take, if the summer storms hit right. She brushed a hand across the brim of her hat. You planning to make a farmer of yourself? I might, if I had someone to share the harvest with. Clara crouched beside him, scooping a shallow trench in the dirt. You already do. They worked in silence, the earth warm beneath their knees. When the barrow was empty and the rows pressed flat, Boone leaned back on his heels. I've been thinking, he said. Clara stood, brushing soil from her palms. That usually means trouble. I want to build something here, not just fences and troughs. A home that holds more than tools and feed sacks. She watched him. You already have that. I want to make it yours too. Clara's breath caught in her chest. She didn't answer right away, not because she didn't know but because she did. That night, she asked Ruthie to help her fold the linens. The girl nodded solemnly, smoothing the corners with small, careful hands. Would you mind if we stayed here? Clara asked. Ruthie looked up. With Boone? Yes. I like it when he calls Robbie partner. Makes Robbie sit straighter. Clara smiled. And you? I like it best when he laughs in the morning. It sounds like the sun coming up. Clara closed the last drawer and tucked a strand of hair behind the girl's ear. I think we'll stay then. Later, she found Boone on the back porch, a whittling knife in his hand and a half-shaped horse in his lap. The lantern beside him flickered in the breeze. She didn't sit, just stood there, arms folded. I've been thinking too, she said. Boone set the carving aside. I'm listening. I don't want to live waiting for something to go wrong. I want to wake up and know what I'm working toward. I want to grow things and mend what breaks. And I want to do it beside someone who doesn't scare easy. He rose, slow and steady. You want to do it here? I do. Boone stepped close, his voice low. Then stay. Stay for good. I already did. When his hands found hers, there was no hesitation, no doubt. Just the kind of quiet certainty that comes from choosing something again and again, not because you have no other way but because it's the only way that feels like home. They married beneath the cottonwoods on a Sunday morning, with the children standing close and the dogs circling their feet. Boone wore his cleanest shirt, the collar stiff with starch. Clara wore a blue calico dress she'd sewn from fabric found in a crate behind the barn. Robbie held the rings in a carved box. Ruthie scattered wildflowers along the path. Afterward, Boone led Clara to the house, stopping just inside the threshold. I cleared out the back room, he said. Made space for your sewing table. Clara reached up, brushing her fingers along his jaw. You didn't need to. I wanted to. She leaned in, resting her head against his shoulder. Then I'll fill it with something worth the space. Years passed. The ranch grew slow and strong. Boone built a second barn with Robbie's help, the boy steady and silent but always watching. Ruthie learned how to ride, her feet barely reaching the stirrups at first, her laughter trailing behind her like a ribbon in the wind. Clara taught again, not in a schoolhouse, but at the table by the hearth, where letters were shaped with chalk and numbers added up in beans and pebbles. She taught Ruthie how to read aloud with care, and Robbie how to write his name without fear of getting it wrong. She made dresses for the girl and shirts for the boy and mended Boone's trousers with thread the color of dry grass. Her hands stayed busy, but her heart was still. Not quiet like it had been when she was alone, but quiet like something settled deep and warm. On the 5th winter together, Boone planted apple trees near the creek. The land had softened with the rains, and he said they'd bear fruit in time. Clara knew they would. She watched him dig the holes with Robbie at his side and Ruthie handing him saplings with a gentle touch. That night, Boone sat beside her by the fire, a book unopened in his lap. You remember when you told me you used to run? He asked. I do. You don't anymore. No, Clara said. I don't. He reached for her hand, tracing the lines of her fingers like he was still learning them. But he wasn't. He'd never stopped learning, and neither had she. They had built something slow as dawn, firm as stone. And in that quiet, enduring life, they found love not in grand declarations, but in every day they woke to the sound of each other's breath and chose it again. The storms came and went. The crops failed one year and thrived the next. The children grew and the dog grew old. But the house stood firm, and the porch still caught the morning sun. And Clara never once looked back.